I'm just so excited because last night I played the fourth around the table campaign with my group of players, and we're playing the movie era, which is of course one of your favorite eras. I know that just because the uniforms and all that, but it's the first time in Star Trek gaming where there was a mutiny. There was actually a mutiny, and I'm not the kind who approves mutinies, generally, but mind-blowing good acting from the five other players, three of which have never watched. Well, they only watched Star Trek once they started playing with me.
Nice.
Yeah. So what a good feeling. Have you ever had a mutiny happen on one of your games?
Indirectly. Yeah, way back when in the before times, before Last Union Gorn games, before Decipher, before everything, we ran a homebrew, and one of the players didn't want to play a Starfleet officer, so he played a civilian diplomat who was on board the ship. We had a Galaxy class ship, so it was like the Enterprise D, and we were primarily focused on like discovery and first contact missions. And so as a civilian diplomat representing the United Federation of Planets, he had his own particular goals, and they weren't always in line with the captain's goals. And of course I was playing the captain. So he and I often butted heads on how to approach certain situations. And I think there was one particular first contact situation that came up where he was vehemently against what was going on. And he, like, during the course of the session, the player actively campaigned the other players to try to like be against the captain and against the rest of the crew and whatever. And it got heated, right? But I mean, it was all still in character and still a lot of fun. But I think he ended up in the brig.
So I actually could not have guessed the scenario. So we were playing, beware y'all, spoiler alert, Christopher Bennett's Stolen Liberties. So you may want to la for 2 minutes, but it's a prime directive type story also. And the captain who's been playing the captain, again, a new player to Star Trek, was mentored by Captain Kirk, and so has this cowboy diplomacy about themselves, whereas the helmsman and the navigator are very Starfleet protocol heavy. So I actually built the module around making the captain have to make a decision when, like, do you go with Starfleet? Do you give up your cowboy diplomacy? And sometimes do you just follow the rules? Because how I twisted it was that several of the crew members who've been playing along under his leadership defied orders following how he usually does business. Talking about the responsibility and weight of the captaincy. So there actually came a moment where they were all standing around the table, pointing phasers at each other, taking sides.
Oh my gosh.
and it was tense. And then we rolled initiative, and then they each took a turn. Some people went running, and some people went dodging behind stuff, and then other people started shooting. And it was just, honestly, I have to say, around the table for Star Trek, it was the most exciting night. We were all panting after. It took about an hour to calm down. It was so great.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, so here we are continuing the conversation, right, about Star Trek Adventures. I'm Michael Dismuke. I am a blogger on Continuing Mission, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures RPG, and also a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG. And of course, I'm always so pleased to introduce Jim Johnson.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modifius Entertainment. These many years now, seven years strong. We're just about at the point now, I think I'd have to do the math, we're just about starting to outpace Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager in terms of length of stay in the world.
Very nice.
Of course, Next Gen had some movies, right? So we got to overcome that. But at least DS9 and Voyager both made it 7 years. Although I guess there's some renewed life, right? Because Janeway's come back into Prodigy, and of course, your girl Seven is back and alive and well in Picard, and who knows what the future holds for her, right? Like I see the Twitter conversations about, let's campaign for a Titan series after this or whatever, and I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm all on board, but like this season's not over yet. right? We're
Right.
5 episodes, or 4 episodes in, 5 episodes in, whatever. We're not even halfway through yet, and we don't know what's going to happen. Like they've been surprising us a little bit these last couple of episodes. Maybe hold on, because I don't think they're going to go back and do any reshoots at this point. So I think who knows what might happen to the Titan in the end here. Like I suspect it will probably live on to do great, awesome things, but there's just that chance, right? That they might
Yeah.
have Shaw and Seven and the Titan go out in a blaze of glory.
I feel like
we'll see.
I feel like what's happening is Paramount's kind of testing the waters and seeing who the torches are going to be passed to. I say torches because there's certain characters who are rising to the top, and we don't know what the next generation is going to. This is the next generation.
Yeah,
so, to me, I love it. I think it also today. We're gonna. I mean, I'm deciding on what we want to talk about today, honestly, because we were supposed to record about motivating the bad guys, but now you're talking about all these shows and these characters. And I've been wanting for a while to talk about, how, as we watch the show, how we could be using this in our games and stuff like that. But we have some good bad guys in these shows. So talking about what motivates a good bad guy or girl or person or entity is, I think, a really good conversation to have. Because we got some doozies in this show.
Yeah, for sure. I think let's stick with that. And as is our want, just add that other one to the list.
Mm-hmm.
Our never-ending list of topics to talk about shows for, right? Like, so there's always something that percolates up that says, oh, that should be a topic for an episode or whatever. And that's how we've managed to be, 70 episodes into this, and we're still going. And the big products for 2023 haven't even come out yet. They haven't even been announced, much less come out yet. And like when they do start being announced and start coming out, like that'll give us another 30 or 40 episodes worth of content to dig into. So we're in good shape here, I think.
Yeah, I think tonight's a fun topic. One, because I'll say what. There's not a good story out there that doesn't have a great villain. The villain makes the story in so many epic adventures that we know, all the way going back to the Bible. Without the villain, you ain't got the story. And all the way through some of our greatest movies and plays and comics, it's the villain. Stan Lee, I remember his viewpoint I really liked. He says there are no villains, there's only fallen heroes.
There.
What do you think about that statement before we start talking about how to construct a great bad guy for your game?
I think that's absolutely fair. I think even before the Bible, there's plenty of stories in historical literature about adversaries and antagonists who weren't the traditional villain, but they were the antagonist to the hero of the story, right? So the antagonists, like the best antagonists, are the heroes of their own story, right? You're just seeing it from the other perspective because there's another hero that is supposed to be more sympathetic and more interesting. But there's legions of stories out there where the villains are actually more interesting to look at than the hero, right? I mean, it's the nature of the beast. Like everybody loves the bad guy, right? It's just how it works. Like of course, I think of like Die Hard, right? Like Bruce Willis's character. Good, solid hero. It does everything you expect a hero to do. Mm-hmm. But it's Hans Gruber that you're really into because that was the character to watch in that movie. And you see that everywhere, right? I mean, it's the villains. Like Luke is a perfectly good hero on the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, all that classic stuff. But Darth Vader gets the badass entrance. He's got he's got the look. He's got the feel. He's got the minions and armor all around him. He's got that huge presence, right? And I think that's something that makes a really good villain is that they've got presence. And in the case of a television drama or a movie drama, they have screen presence. They have stage presence, screen presence, whatever. Whether it's the actor or the voice or the costume or whatever. One
of my biggest villains that I think about when I think about villains in a story is Danny Glover's character in Color Purple. That I remember the reason I liked him as an actor was because after that movie, I hated him so much. and I know it's not, and I actually saw him once at a public event. We were at a Prince concert in San Francisco, and I saw him and I cringed, but then I comported myself and I waved and gave him the head nod. But I was like, what a great actor in order to embody a villain to such level that's what sticks out in my movie more than Whoopi Goldberg's character. you know, in that. So and I know I made some early mistakes when I started creating villains or playing villains in RPG over 30 years ago, where so many just came out as demolishers or bank robbers because I was young. You know, you don't know literature that much. You haven't studied what creates a good antagonist. But as time progressed, I started finding out that, like what Stanley said, is villains have pretty good motivation. Oftentimes they have a solid motivation to do what they're doing. I think about, you know, even if it's somebody like Joker in the movie, you know, he has a mysterious past, you know, something messed him up at some point, but he's just a chaos being. So you know how to play him because he is a chaos being. And I would advise game masters, when you're creating an antagonist in your story, whether it's an ambassador visiting, whether it's a Klingon, if it's the Borg, if you dare to play them, you don't need to have a convoluted story for motivation. Sometimes one powerful value that they're going to drive to no matter what can really create, when they're just tenacious about achieving their goal, that really can just explode into a whole flower of ideas. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think by and large, I would agree. I think, me personally, I think I'd be careful not to give them just one good value, because you don't want to necessarily. I mean, I guess it depends on your story and what you're trying to accomplish. Like, I've never been a fan of the one note villains that are like, you know, I'm evil and angry because of this, and like I'm hitting the trope and I'm hitting the stereotype, and like that's all I am, right? Like, you know, everybody is multifaceted, even the kindest person or the most evil person. There are levels to them, right? There's always something else going on. And I think it would be, you know, and we talked about this ad infinitum, but it'd be a combination of a couple really strong values and then some really interesting focuses to kind of blend it together and really get at that character to see what's going on with them.
Well, so let's talk about some. Yeah, let's use some examples though, like in Star Trek Khan. I just had the pleasure of finishing A View from the Bridge by Nicholas Meyer. A great book, by the way, if anybody wants to understand screenplays and kind of how Hollywood works. And of course, he was the screenplay for Wrath of Khan, for Voyage Home, and for Undiscovered Country, which are my top three movies, if you were to ask me, my top three movie era movies. And if you take a look at Khan, his motivation was revenge. And in the end, the revenge was because of the death of his wife. And he was so in love. And then to be stranded and then see coming back to connecting with Starfleet, he finds out that his nemesis who stranded him in the planet is now an admiral. This weak man is now an admiral who's living the glory. And Khan was just like, no, unacceptable in my world where I'm a superior being. Like, this is just injustice. In his mind, it was injustice to a fault. And I just thought that that's such a simply well-designed character.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Khan, I think, is he wasn't just a one-off villain, right? They did tie him back to an episode of the original series, and so he was a recurring character, but was also, able to be made even bigger than life than he was in the TV show, because now he's on the big screen. And of course, Ricardo Montalban with the pecs and the costume and the broken medallion. It was like that perfect blend of look and feel and everything. So yeah, I think Khan's a great example of a character that. Like, that movie is really built on the characters, right? And that's what's so good about Star Trek and what you could do with Star Trek Adventures is you can have those character relationships over a long span of time. Like, I mean, if you are so fortunate as to play in the Star Trek Adventures campaign long enough that your characters develop this connection with the villain, and the villain comes back, or not villain but adversary. To do that long arc where Kirk rescues Khan, and then they send him off to a planet, and then they forget about him, and they go off and do their adventures, and then at some point the game master brings them back and says, "Oh, hey, remember that planet you dumped those people on? Well, something happened, and now they're coming back for vengeance."
Yeah,
it's classic, right? And it's so good when you can make those connections. You don't have to do it for you don't have to wait 30 years to do it, right? You could it's Star Trek, it's time travel. You could send them off on their way, and oh, look, they got thrown into a wormhole, and then they come back.
Yeah.
2 years later, but it's been 1,000 years for them or something like that. And now that their descendants are coming after you, like, I don't know, you can rip
Well,
on
to
it.
your point, no, to your point, I think that oftentimes game masters might make the mistake of, in their mind, building up this villain and thinking that one episode is enough to contain them. But if you think about the greatest villains of Star Trek, whether it's Lore, I'll even call Noonien Singh. I'm not sorry, Soong. Dr. Soong is kind of a villain who showed up in different generations. It's a thematic villain, and then you have Moriarty, right? You have Moriarty or the Borg Queen. Like these are ones that showed up in multiple. There's a build to them. Gorkon. They show up here a little bit, but really it's those single instances that I think builds the character. In my game, I know we have 2 to 3 major characters, antagonists, who, no matter what happens, the crew in the back of their head are always like, is this Dr. Salaman Magic? Oh, is this Methra making their return? And I like that because it's just the foreboding that sometimes just creates the villain too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll go back to DS9. Right, DS9's got some great examples, right? You got Gul Dukat, and you got Kai Winn, and you got Wei-Yun, and I guess the female changeling. Although I think Dukat and Winn, even Wei-Yun are more interesting to me than the female changeling.
I think so.
But those characters, like, it's always surprising to me when I'm doing research for the game and we're writing these characters up to, like, and I wanted to go watch all the episodes that they were in. And like Kai Winn was only in like 12 or 14 episodes or something like that. And you think, gosh, DS9 was like 170 something episodes. Mm-hmm. And she was only in a very small percentage of them, but she had such an impact in every one of those episodes that you feel like she's been there forever. And like, she's one of those characters, like the moment she's on screen, you hate her. Like,
exactly.
Like the moment, she's going to do something heinous to our beloved characters, even though she's totally in the right in her own mind, because she's the hero of her story, and everything that she does makes sense to her. And like, from a certain point of view, it's all logical, but because it's at diametrical opposite what our heroes want, then that's where the great tension comes in. And of course, Dukat is a great villain. Wei-Yun is a great villain, and of course the female changeling too. But I think the female changeling, I don't think was enough. There wasn't enough depth to her, I think, to really make her multifaceted like Dukat. I mean, Dukat was probably the most in-depth adversary we've had on Trek for a while, I think.
Again, we grow to like them, and that's what's hard, is because there comes a point where I felt sorry for Dukat and the system that produced him, the death of his daughter. Sorry, spoiler alert. But again, I think when I'm writing a villain or a bad guy or an antagonist, or whatever we're going to call the adversary, there's creative ways to let them win without shattering your players. So it could be politics, diplomacy. Kai Winn won a lot. Oh, that's weird. Winn won. And she won a lot, which frustrated the characters. They didn't lose anything except maybe face or a little bit of power and authority. But finding creative ways to let the villains win. It could be, I know sometimes when I design a character, the adversary is essential to their succeeding in their mission, but they're going to have to give a little in order to succeed. And I know it irritates them, but they're always like, we have to work with this person. And I think that's the most beautiful moment when they admire the person's intelligence, skills, power, resources, but at the same time they're like, oh, we feel so dirty doing this. And it's there's, again, Dr. Salaman Magic is probably our number one. She's a Cardassian hologram, and she is integral and linked to the chief engineer, where his survival kind of depends on her, his future survival. But she's brilliant. And they're sometimes, let's go activate the program. And she's very arrogant, and she lives in her holographic castle with Bajoran servants.
Oh my gosh.
She's of that era. And so it's just an irritant to everybody, but they cannot deactivate her program. And again, if you can create something like that, an adversary that they have to work with, that's a beautiful villain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those kind of recurring characters are just great to go back to every now and then and drop them back into, because the players, like, they come to enjoy it, right? They may hate the character, but they love the interplay and the relationship and stuff. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you are fortunate enough to be running a game or playing in a game that develops legs like that, and you don't end up with like dropouts and then the game kind of collapses, or life rolls happen and you have to end the game or whatever. Like if you're able to get some continuity going and start stringing episode after episode, and you can start building those relationships, I think that's where the real power of serialized storytelling comes in. I mean, whether it's Star Trek or another game, but we're talking about Star Trek here, right? So
yeah,
I think that's the real power of Star Trek, is like being able to start building that long narrative of stuff that you can start dropping in these recurring characters.
Right. Now, at the same time, some people may be listening to this and be like, well, I'm not really going to have a recurring character because we're on the furthest edges of space. We're going to be more like Voyager, where we have a new villain of the week. And there is a way to do that too. I think about say a characters that I've built, or say a Ferengi shows up, right? The Ferengi can't be as simple as I want Latinum. There's a reason they're placed in that story as an antagonist, meaning that it's not necessary in Star Trek, of course, to kill your adversary. It's not a hack 'em slash 'em game. It's good to frame your players that their goal is merely to find out what this person wants and then defy that strategy. Because at this point, if you ruin the adversary's goal, they're not going to just start firing phasers at point. I know there was one case where we had an assassin in our game who was trying to assassinate a dignitary, but the assassin had motivation. They were doing it for pay. The minute they're caught and someone will pay them to divulge information about who hired them, they're money motivated. So it doesn't have to become a shootout, is my point. So even if you have a single adversary, I think it's important for game masters to flesh out what will make this person tick. At what point will they break? Are they really into violence, or are they just into intimidation? Two different things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, treat your villains like you would treat your player characters, right? Because like the player characters are there, they're trying to accomplish their goals. The villain gets in the way, and then the players have to figure out, okay, now how do I get around this? How do I work through this? So have the same philosophy with your villains, right? The villains are trying to accomplish their own things, and it's the player characters getting in their way. So if the player characters foil them at some point, then you have to think, okay, what's the villain going to do now? What's the next logical thing that they would do? If the crew's defeated me on this thing, well, I'm going to go do this, and then the characters have to go, deal with that. So there's like two stories going on at the same time, right? It's the villain story and the hero story, or the characters, main character story.
Yeah,
and they're constantly going back and forth, and like to make a really good rich villain, I think you treat the villain like a hero, and treat the player characters like the villain, and go back and forth that way, and just see what happens.
Yeah, I think, again, each villain is a potential underworld contact that could also show up later too. If it ends in a way, it's kind of like, oh man, we've seen that in Star Trek before. It's like, oh, we got to hit the bar, and we know what motivates this person. Toss some Latinum down, toss whatever, give them some information. But to me, when you create the richness of that adversary like that they're not just so myopic or just so surface their motivation, but they have a life, they have family. Where do they live? Why are they doing this? Where does the money go when they make it? What investments do they have? Who else do they work at? Could they potentially be your into the Romulan Empire, the Klingon Empire, because they're dirty dealing on both sides? So kind of sketch that out. And then when your characters are interacting with them and you're playing the adversary, have that in the back of your mind. They have a price, maybe. They have motivation. Maybe finding out they have a child, and that's why they do it, is to protect their child who's being raised by the Organa family. just as an example, is some really cool ways to create a deep adversary that you actually love, that you actually like.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to play it that way, you can. Like, I always love the story. I mean, I know it's kind of I don't know if it's a cliche anymore. It might be a cliche now, but I always love the idea that, when you have a long narrative, you got the players, or you got the hero characters and the adversaries, and they're always butting heads. But then there's those occasional stories where they have to work together to solve a problem, right? They're strange bedfellows, or enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of thing. And I feel I need to turn in my card because I can't remember the name of the episode. There's an episode of DS9 where Dukat is on the station when the station computers sabotages the station. It's like a Bajoran, deep terrorist program implanted, and then everybody's stuck, right? They're all stuck on the station trying to figure out how to fix it before they all get killed. And Dukat has to work with them, they'll have to work together to solve the problem. And I suspect that's probably a cliche now, but I just love that kind of storyline where like you're having a scene and you're head to head with the villain, and then just as something is about to happen, oh, a disaster strikes, and now you're forced to work together with this person who's still got their own motives and goals, but they're also trying to survive just like you. And
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. I mean,
they did that with Quark and they did that with Quark and Garrick so much that while you're working with Quark or Garrick as a character, you're wondering if they did this on purpose. Were they the saboteur behind it? Are they going to stab you? Are you playing into their hands? Right. I actually think being able to write a story like that, where again, you're watching your back, and at the end, if you shake hands or if you do get dogged by them, it's kind of like a lesson learned. We knew it going in. Yeah. I think getting my players to let their guard down is one of my favorite things,
What's fun too, of course, now because we're talking about specifically Star Trek, right? Although you could probably do this in other franchises, is that when you have scenes like that, depending on where you're on the timeline, you could also have another layer there, like you could do a little gotcha at the end. Like not only was the adversary and the hero having to work together, and then they're resolved, but they still button heads. But you could have that little extra twist that one of them is actually a changeling, and you get that whole extra layer of stuff going on. Like, oh, wait a minute. And then you have to think back, like that whole episode, like, was that all staged? Was that all intentional? Like, there's another whole layer to that, and I mean, you could go further with it, but it could be Q snapping his fingers and it all arc.
Yeah, well, I think also planning intimate moments with the adversary shouldn't always be explosions and running and chases and ship battles. I mean, I do want to, as a side note, because it hit me as an epiphany while I was listening to the book by Nicholas Meyer. Kirk and Khan never met in the entire movie. They only saw each other on view screens, which I was like, I was like, that was brilliant. But going back to what I was saying before about intimate moments, if you can write in scenes, and I think about the time when Dukat was with hiking with Kira, and he sat on something sharp, and they had this humorous, intimate moment. These enemies, who had been fighting for decades. And I've done that in my game where we have these intimate moments with the adversaries. And it just changes the players, how they view them. It humanizes them in a sense that you don't really want to defeat the villain. You want to redeem the villain. And they have conversations with these people. I think about our captain, who's a Romulan captain and had an arch enemy, who was a commander in the Romulan Star Empire, and they had an intimate moment once on a bridge where they weren't sure if they were hallucinating or not, the main character, but it was actually the real character. And then he drifts into the fog. He goes into the fog, and then later when they really do meet, the character was like, "Well, was that a dream, or did we have this moment together?" And so ever since then, I've been trying to tie in, slow stuff down where there's some sort of intimate moment where they're not fighting and they get to have actually a conversation with the character.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Like your villains and your encounters with them doesn't always have to be fisticuffs or shoot 'em ups or eating up the scenery on the bridge, yelling at each other across the comm screen or whatever. Like you can have your villains do all kinds of things very quiet. In fact, it's the quiet scenes that are the scariest sometimes, because then you're really getting the sense of like, how are they thinking and what are they doing? What is their motivation? And like one example that that came to mind while you were talking was Breaking Bad. There's an episode of Breaking Bad where Walter White is in a situation, and he's watching someone who is suffering from a drug overdose. They're choking on their own vomit and are dying, and he is in a position where he could very easily save them, but you can see the gears turning, and he's projecting far ahead. He's like, okay, if what are the possibilities here, right? And he lets the character die, and it's like, whoa, okay, so I mean, clearly there's stuff going on here, and you're like, oh man, like you empathize with the guy, but at the same time, he's like, oh, he's pretty heinous. And it's a very quiet moment. It's a very quiet scene, right? He's just literally just sitting there watching it happen, and you can see the actor is so good. You can see him thinking like you can see the gears turning, right? He's like planning out his chess moves, and for his purposes, that character needed to die, and sure enough died, and then things progressed. But that's it's great writing, but it's also a really powerful character moment that you can absolutely do in Star Trek if you wanted to go that way, and if your players are okay with it too. I mean, certainly check in with your players before you do something like that, because obviously not everyone is here for that. So
yeah, maybe we need to make it less motivating the bad guy. I think maybe the title I spoke about at the beginning is wrong. I think it's more about making your adversaries come alive. I think that I would entitle that, because so often in Star Trek you come across first contact situations. And I know in my game, I purposely designed the aliens to not think like humans. I'm going to try to find a different thing that motivates this species and a different experience they've had in how they've grown and adapted to the universe that they don't understand humans. And so I've enjoyed it immensely watching my players when something appears like a first contact gone wrong or there's a miscommunication, they start self-examining, like, well, are we making assumptions? Do they even view verbal communication as rude? Did we check that? Or if they're a whole different kind of life form, well, what animal do they communicate like the most? Are they doing light? And do they view us as organic beings sentient? Are they even aware that they're sentient organic beings? They're coming from another universe. So again, sometimes new players will view a first contact situation, and if all of a sudden they're under attack, they're automatically going to view it like this is a bad guy. What are the motivations of these adversaries? In Star Trek, you got to peel back the layers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we see that in so many shows where things are misunderstood on that. Yeah.
I mean, misunderstandings happen. I think Enterprise is a good example of that, right? There were a lot of situations where they were just kind of like stumbling in the dark, right? Learning how things worked, and plenty of times they had mistaken identities or misunderstandings, and it's like, oh, we didn't know that's how that worked out here. Sorry, we're still learning. We're the humans, the noobs on the scene, right? We're trying to figure it out. So there's a lot of ways you can play with that.
Yeah, you had mentioned 2 values, and I think now that you mentioned it, I do want to expand on why values are so important, especially for the adversary. I know I draw on the values to make statements and to remind me of what their argument is in life, like what their viewpoint is. And I've really enjoyed the modules. And again, you can't get this in the mission briefs because there's not enough room for it. Where the modules let you expound on is a lot of bullet points about what the thinking is behind the adversaries. I know I wrote 8 layers deep, and one of the characters in there, the antagonist, is a rogue captain/scientist who is illegally. I'm not going to give any more spoilers, actually. But I bullet pointed his arguments throughout, like, probably 7 bullet points of his history, what brought him to where he is, why he was doing what he was doing, what his motivation was. And that really helped me, because then I could refer to that whenever the characters were talking to me. I could read the value, make his statement, or I could even look at that explanation. So as advice for those of you having adversaries, take some time, build some good values, the statements they live by, say them out loud to the players in conversation, because not every adversary sounds alike. They all have different reasonings. So doing notes like that is a really helpful tool that I use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always agreed with Nathan that the dialogue that this character is, they're telling you who they are, right? Listen to them. You put 3 or 4 good values down, and I love your idea. Yeah, use that stuff as dialogue in your episode or in your scenario or whatever, just to make sure that they vocalize what they believe and what they feel, because that'll give the players a real clear understanding of what that character's about. If their actions don't already, if their actions don't cover it. And of course, we've seen that plenty of times, right? You see the guest star doing something desperate or unusual, and you're like, what's that? That's clearly evil. But then you do the Star Trek thing and you try to dig a little deeper. Like I think Picard's probably the best example, not the series, but the character Picard always really seemed to try to dive deeper into trying to understand what this other character was doing. And I wouldn't call Dathan an enemy, but like there was a moment during the episode with that was it, Dathan, I think it was called. Shit, that's the second episode I drew a blank on, man. The Temerian, and the one who speaks in metaphors.
Tanagra,
yeah. So initially, the first couple of acts of that episode, Picard thought this guy was an adversary, but he made the effort to try to learn and try to understand, and then he figured it out. I mean, there's plenty of examples.
Yeah, I would suggest new game masters run 2 or 3 games where it's that situation, just so you educate your players. Get rid of your assumptions going in, because this is Star Trek. This is a whole different universe. I have to say that's one of the, I've been playing online for 5 years and just recently got back into tabletop gaming. And I have to say that's something that tabletop gaming allows you to do that you can't do online. And that's watch people's facial expressions and also act. They're watching your facial expressions, your mannerisms. They're listening to your tone of voice, and they're really trying to, like, I love watching these new players really watch as I shift characters, and they're trying to, like, well, maybe this person's not that bad after all, and then they talk amongst themselves. And that's something that I think tabletop gaming gives you that you just can't get in a virtual environment.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it depends on the virtual environment.
I mean, like Discord. I should say like Discord. I don't mean like I'm not talking about like Clear Skies or Perseverance where you see everyone's face. Right. I mean, Discord is the way I play normally.
Yeah. It's harder to pick up. I mean, you can, if you're really paying attention, you can pick up voice and tone and like breaths and long pauses and stuff like that. It's a lot easier when you're able to see the person and the facial tics and all that stuff. Certainly easier to do in person, because like you get the whole body language and everything else going on, because you can only see so much of the screen, right? There's only so much you can see. Right. But yeah, I think and of course, there's all kinds of ways to go about it, but
yeah, it's so important because there's so much difference between, a Borg Queen and a Gold Ducat and a Quark, who came out adversarial at first. And I love when, like, I can introduce on Discord, because they know my villains so well. I can just introduce a line and they all turn around. So just the line, they don't see the person, so I don't have to describe it. But they know merely by the line of sentence when the person says the first thing, they're like, "Oh Lord, it's that character's back." And I love that they've all developed their own vernacular and way of saying things, which is when you really developed a strong personality to the adversary.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's been a while, I think, Jim, since we actually were able to break down something like this, kind of the acting role and the character development role. I do look forward to wanting to do more episodes in the future about helping people build modules and how to write these stories and write the acts, because I know you have that open invitation to people to submit stuff. And if we can maybe give people advice, not only how to write great adversaries, but really just how to structure a story to make it more palatable, as a submission, I think that would be a good way for us to go.
Yeah, and happy to do that. Absolutely. I think just to give a teaser, right? I mean, I'm conflicted a little bit, because, like, on the one hand, it's a role-playing game, and I don't want people to feel like they have to do a lot of homework to get into it, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were an aspiring writer for me, or if you want to be an aspiring game master or even a player, like as a writer, like the thing that I was always taught is, if you want to write science fiction, you want to write fantasy, you want to write mystery, you want to write thriller, I mean, whatever genre you want to write, do your research, right? Go out there, read the classics in your genre, watch the TV shows that are classics in your genre, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, if you want to write Star Trek, whether you're a game master or a player, or you want to write for the game or whatever, like, do your research. And it's so easy to do your research now, because there's 1,000 hours of Star Trek. Go pick one that you like. If you don't like Picard, that's fine. If you don't like Lower Decks, that's fine. There's like 11 series now and 13 movies. There's going to be something you'll probably like. And go, hit Google, because there is no shortage of, best of episode lists out there. And you can even gradiate them to, like, what's the best comedy Star Trek episodes? What's the best drama episode? I mean, there's tons of lists out there, right? So you watch a few episodes of Star Trek, go to your library, or go online, because, like, I'm sure there's no shortage of websites that will teach you about like basic story structure, story theory, writing screenplays, writing, hitting the beats, all that. I mean, all that stuff, right? That's stuff that I've been learning for 30 years, and it's all in my head. That's what came out with the mission briefs and everything else. So you don't have to you don't have to learn all this stuff necessarily, but, like, just do a little bit of research. I think this is the same argument I have for people who are curious about the game. don't know anything about Star Trek. It's like, well, watch a few episodes. I mean, they're not hard to find. I mean, on streaming services and old discs or whatever, they're relatively easy to find. You can watch plenty of clips on YouTube, right, or whatever streaming service you want to watch. I'm willing to bet you probably have a friend who has a collection of Star Trek discs or cassettes or whatever. So yeah, I mean, just
if you're a reader, you can do comics and novels too. Exactly. They'll also give you the same. There's lots of ways. There's even audiobooks. My mom, never a big Trekkie. She's in the other room while my dad and me are watching it. But we did a drive to San Diego, and I got one of the audiobooks and just started playing it because we're gonna be driving in the car, and our trip ended before the last chapter, and she's like, "So what happened?" I'm like, "Okay, Mom, you're just gonna have to listen to it." So I had to go to her and actually play her the last chapter because she was intrigued with what. And I said that was awesome that for her the audiobook got her into a Star Trek story, which I thought was cool.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Just drive a little bit longer.
Exactly.
Do an extra loop around the cul-de-sac or something.
Yeah, we should have gone into Tijuana and back, and then cool. All right. So again, this episode, we changed it into making your adversaries come alive. Again, I just thought it was important because in the end, even though we know the story is about your stalwart crew, the captain and whatever ship you're on, it's really going to be those adversaries, those first contacts, or the recurring bad guy who is going to, that's what your player is going to talk about, is how they overcome that person as a challenge. And so just some tidbits. Of course, we could talk more about it, but thought we would give that to you all today. Any final words about it, Jim, before we head over to gratitude?
I was just going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Did we cover the topic in enough detail that you wanted to, or do you want to go a little deeper? Or sounds like we hit it, but I mean, we could talk about like giving them character ticks or props or unique sound effects or something.
Let's do that. No, let's cap it off. Let's make sure this is as complete as possible. How would you start on it? I have some ideas, but what would you start with the character ticks and props and things like that?
I mean, I was thinking like, if you want to make the character memorable, especially in a gaming, gaming, standpoint, where as a game master, you're responsible for the voices and the mannerisms and the ticks, right? Like give your villain or your adversary a unique speech pattern or a specific way they phrase things, or even an accent, right? If you're comfortable with accents, like don't do a hokey accent because your players are gonna get sick of it after about 30 seconds.
Right.
If you can sustain it and it's interesting, then go for it. But
like just to give some examples of real ones, like I told you about that Romulan commander. He collected baubles. He was into trinkets of power, whether it be mythological or whether it not. And you didn't oftentimes get to be on his ship or in his office, but his crew would talk about how he's always going around collecting things, trying to increase his power. So that was kind of the thing, is the collector. And then Solomon Madrick, the hologram, she's always very condescending. She talks to people as if they're her servants, and she's royalty. And that's the way she interacts with people, which drives the Starfleeters crazy because she's an elitist. And to add that, I have in the hologram, she has the Bajoran servants. So that's just a mainstay of her program. Things like that make them very recognizable. Or, I think about the Grand Nagus with his scepter. Not that he's not always an adversary, but again, Gorkon, or they'll all have some sort of trinket or some sort of thing that they say, which is common.
Yep. You even have their spaceship have a distinctive sound to the engines, right? Whenever you hear that particular whine, who's coming. Maybe like Q, they have, like, every time they appear, they get that distinctive little snap and visual effect, right? It's like, even if it's subtle, like you see it, you're like, oh crap, here it comes. And then it could
even be a perfume or something they hum.
Smell. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. And I think that really rounds out a character when you start doing stuff like that. I think about Luoxana Troy, right? She's gaudy and she has her servant carrying her incredibly heavy bag. It's little things like that make a character fun and singular.
Yeah, the main adversaries' minions, right? Those are always interesting. Like when suddenly they show up, well, who's around the corner. And if they're not, then something's really up. I think there was that one episode of DS9, right, where you saw the Grand Nagus staff, but the Grand Nagus wasn't in the episode. He was actually missing, and they had to go rescue him. But they had the staff, and you're like, oh boy, it's gonna be a Ferengi episode. Here we go. Buckle up because it's gonna be fun. So yeah, it's just it's not just the adversary; it's the trappings around. It's the people around them. It's the props. It's the whole ambiance.
Yeah,
of the adversary.
Yeah, and rarely do they ever operate alone. There's usually some sort of organizational structure that they're part of. I mean, even if it's a Section 31 villain or Fenris Rangers, or I think about the Captain Rio. Oh yeah, Captain Rios, when he was off the grid and kind of working the underworld. Build them a network, because when you have a lot of threat, we had our episode on threat last week, sometimes they need an escape route. Sometimes you really don't want them to be captured. And that's where your threat and the reversal can just make the escape so that they're out there and you're going to get them again. It could be even you put them in a penal colony, but you can use that reversal to have some escape, and the players have to be like, darn it, there was a lot of threat. That was the narrative trigger that the game master used in order to make this person out there again. So give them a network so it makes narrative sense if they manage to wriggle away.
Right.
Yeah, it's good to do.
Good stuff.
All right. Fantastic. Okay, good. So we want to hear about your games, of course. You're always willing to send us your best villains as you've designed them. You can always post the sheets up at Continuing Missions if you want to. We love fan submissions. It gives other people ideas. And I know we have so many different sheets up there that people borrow from and mix and match in order to create their characters, First Contact and Adversaries. All right. Gratitude time. I'm going to do, of course, for the brick and mortars who not only sell games, but also comic books, which really are some of the best villains and adversaries we have in American literature. And I'm going to give a shout out to Lawanika Miller. I was able to go on the show with them. Tabletop Journeys, a fantastic podcaster, just recently got into playing Star Trek Adventures and is addicted to it. So I'm happy to hear about that. And he goes to Citadel Game Seller. That is his brick and mortar. So a shout out to them. And what about you, Jim?
Awesome. I want to thank all the writers of Star Trek, and I mean just of literature in general, whether it's television or film or books or comic books or any form of writing, who've created wonderful adversaries for us to love and hate and love to hate over the many centuries here. It's been a long time, maybe even before Shakespeare, but Bible, pre-Bible, all that stuff. So thanks to all the writers. We're speaking specifically of Star Trek. So thanks to all the writers of Star Trek who created such memorable villains and adversaries, and then thank yous to all the actors who brought those words to life in so many memorable ways. There's countless numbers of actors and villain characters that we can celebrate and appreciate. So thanks to all of them, and of course I would be remiss if I didn't thank the fans of this here game. So again, thank you so much for being with us for 7 years. Without you, we wouldn't still be doing this game. So thank you for your support. Thank you for your support of each other and of new players coming into the game all the time. I'm always I guess my friends in UK would say chuffed. I'm always chuffed to see the experienced players answering the same questions over and over again very patiently as new players come on board and ask about what's what and what to get and how to play the game and all that stuff. So thank you to the fan base, because you are truly indispensable, and I am grateful for you every day.
Fantastic. All right. Until next time, IDIC, which I guess could be Infinite Diabolics, Infinite Cretins, for the sake of this episode.
How long did it take you to think about that?
Just now.
Live long and prosper, everybody. Be safe, be well. We'll talk to you next time.